Aquifer storage and recovery projects, or ASR projects, involve injecting water into an aquifer or allowing water to infiltrate into an aquifer, where the water can be stored underground and eventually withdrawn and put to use in the future. There are several permits required for ASR projects in Utah. I'm going to be focusing on the 2 permits that are issued by the Division of Water Rights. There's a recharge permit and there's a recovery permit. They are separate. These can be filed together, but they don't have to be. In some cases, it might be convenient to do both at the same time, but this certainly isn't required. The requirements for these permit applications are outlined in state statute, specifically in 73-3B of the Utah Code. So first, the recharge permit. Here's a summary of the information that you would need to provide us for a recharge permit. We need to know some information about the applicant, who you are and how to contact you. We need a detailed description of the project. We need evidence of the water quality permits that are required, the plan of operation, and the valid water rights on the source that is being diverted for artificial recharge. Lastly, there's a fee. The recharge permit fee is dependent upon the amount of water that you're going to be recharging. So if it's a small amount, it's a smaller fee. This is the standard fee schedule that we use for several other types of water right applications. Now I'm going to talk about a few of these requirements in a little more detail. As I said, our application for a recharge permit asks if you have the required water quality permits. We don't make you get those permits before you file with us, so you can do them in tandem. You could file the necessary applications with their offices at the same time you're filing those applications with our office. If that's what you do, then we will condition the approval that you have those permits in hand before you recharge the aquifer. We ask on the recharge application for a description of the plan of operation, the type of project, whether the water is going to be injected into wells or allowed to percolate from infiltration basins is certainly part of that. We want the applicant to provide a detailed description of the project. We want to know the design capacity, how much water is going to be recharged. We also will want the applicant to establish a monitoring program that will provide an accurate accounting of the amount of water that is recharged. This monitoring program will depend on the project type. If the project uses injection wells, those wells will be required to be metered so we know how much water is injected. If the project uses infiltration basins, it's a little bit more challenging to measure how much actually recharges, so we typically turn to a water budget approach, estimating the recharge as the difference between the measured inflow and all other outflows like evaporation. Often, the monitoring program for projects will include water level measurements at monitoring wells. This helps confirm that the water that is recharged is actually getting into the aquifer and how it is behaving afterwards. We also need to know information about the duration of the project. Some projects might be trying to use winter water rights to divert that water in the winter, put it in the ground, and then pull it back and use it during the summer. Other projects might be longer term, intending to store water during years with above average surface supply for use several years later during drought conditions, so a longer term project. This information will help determine what kind of monitoring is needed and will help us set other guidelines for the project. The application also asks for a groundwater study. We need to know what the hydrogeologic conditions are like at the project site and that the project is feasible and can work. The groundwater study should also provide information that will indicate whether the project would cause harm to land or existing water rights and provide an assessment of how much water will be recoverable. Now, we look at the amount of recoverable water in greater detail with the recovery permit, so I will talk more about that when I discuss that permit. Having a general idea of how the project will work and that the plan is consistent with the hydrologic and geologic reality helps show us that an entity is aware of the financial and technical requirements of the project and that they will have the capacity of meeting those requirements. In order to collect all of this information, entities often conduct a pilot project, and we encourage that. Another requirement of the recharge application is a valid water right. This is a very critical requirement that our office looks at closely. So if you want to artificially recharge water, you either need to own a valid water right or have an agreement with someone else who owns a valid water right. Another point worth mentioning is that a recharge application is not a change application. Suppose you have a water right to divert surface water during the summer for irrigation use. And suppose you get a recharge permit with that water right. Now, that recharge permit does not mean you can now divert water during the winter or spring. It also does not mean you can recover that water and use it for municipal or some other non-irrigation purpose. To make those changes, you have to file a change application. The change application process is designed to make sure that changes to the water rights don't impact other water users. So if you want to use the water for a different purpose than the original water right application, you would need to also file a change application. The recharge permit only allows you to use that water right to put water into the ground. All right, so that's the information that's required for a recharge permit. Now I'm going to talk about recovery permits. When the law was set up, there was this idea that perhaps different entities would file for different recovery permits on the same recharge permit. Because of this, the recovery application asks for evidence of consent from the owner of the recharge permit. In practice, usually the entity that files a recovery permit is the same entity that has the recharge permit, so this isn't necessary. We also require information describing each recovery well. Knowing the location of these wells is important to us for determining the duration of time that a given amount of artificial recharge has remained in the aquifer under the control of the ASR project and can be recovered. Many times, the owner has existing production wells in the region surrounding the project that they want to use as recovery wells. There is also a fee for recovery applications, and it's $2,500. This is quite a bit more than the fee for recharge permits, and that is because we spend a lot of time reviewing the recovery application and setting up the rules for the storage accounting and defining loss parameters. After a recovery permit is submitted to our office, and after we review all the information, we issue an order with a decision. But this isn't the end of the process. Recharge and recovery permits are both given 5 years to submit proof to our office. If an entity needs more than 5 years, they can request an extension. The order approving the permit will generally contain some conditions. We might require elements to be added to the monitoring program. We generally require annual submission of water quality reports and the quantity of water stored and recovered. And we specify in the order how the storage accounting will be done. In addition to the application fee, the division may charge an annual fee to cover the costs associated with reviewing the monitoring data and administering the storage accounting. These orders specifying the conditions under which recovery permits can operate are not fixed. We can change them as necessary. After a few years of experience operating the project, and hopefully a few years of high-quality monitoring data, we'd expect to have a better understanding of the aquifer system. So we can update the order to reflect that, and this is often requested by the applicant. Now for the storage account. Each ASR project gets a storage account. The storage account keeps track of the water recharged into the aquifer, keeps track of the amounts that are recovered, and it tracks the loss adjustments that represent water escaping out of the project's area of control. It's kind of like a bank account. The project makes deposits, makes withdrawals, and is subject to gradual losses. The storage and loss parameters are set using information from the hydrologic study and from any other hydrologic information that is available to us. Generally, there are 3 parameters that we use to represent the account losses. There is the initial wait period. After water is recharged, this is the amount of time during which water can be recovered without any loss being applied to the account. There is also a loss factor. Every year, this loss is calculated as a percentage of the storage that has been in the account for longer than the initial wait period. And finally, the month of loss is the month that the loss is applied. Here's a slide showing the locations of the current projects. I'm going to briefly talk about 3 of these projects. These maps show the location of the Washington County Water Conservancy District ASR project. Water is recharged from Sand Hollow Reservoir, which sits on top of a deep, unconfined sandstone aquifer. The geology of the area constrains the aquifer on the west, south, and east, with the Virgin River creating the northern boundary of the system. Originally, the recovery permit was approved with the condition that losses would be assessed at 10% per year, but as this project has been developed and extensively monitored, the applicant has been able to show that they have maintained control of a greater portion, and the loss accounting has been adjusted accordingly. This is the map that was submitted to our office in support of the application for a recovery permit for the Weber Basin ASR project. Weber Basin has water rights on the Weber River, and they constructed an infiltration basin near the mouth of Weber Canyon. The plan is to withdraw water from storage from their existing production wells shown on this map. The aquifer in Cedar City Valley is a critical management area. Water users are depleting more water than recharges on average, and groundwater levels are declining. So Central Iron County Washington Conservancy District filed a recharge application to try to get any excess surface water into the ground in hopes of propping up the aquifer. Their permit was approved, and they have started to divert excess runoff into several infiltration basins throughout the area. Here's a photo of another infiltration basin that is part of the project. This recharge is being done to help the aquifer and for the benefit of existing groundwater users, so there's not going to be a recovery permit filed. The next subject is reuse of wastewater. Publicly owned treatment works that treat water supplied under a valid water right can reuse water if the water right is approved for municipal use, if the nature of reuse is consistent with the uses approved under that water right, and if the public agency receives approval from the Water Quality Board and the state engineer. The application for reuse includes a description of the underlying water right, evaluation of the diversion, depletion, and return flow requirements, and the proposed quantity of water to be reused.